So, Morley Robbins, you are a researcher, it seems. You know, your book, Copper Cure, is quite fascinating. I read it a couple years ago, and I'm now rereading it now just again. And bump into so many of these communities that abstain from potentially problematic minerals like copper, but also very powerful minerals like copper that require proper metabolism of fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin A or retinol. My first question for you, we see many people not able to introduce copper into their plan or into their diet. And a lot of times we see a scenario where they're not able to metabolize retinol. And so I'm wondering if you've run into any of this yourself, and if you have any quick tips to improve the metabolism of retinol from animal products. I mean, as people know, we can also get it in the form of beta carotene, the precursor. But in your experience, how have you improved retinol metabolism?
Well, I think a great question, and certainly a factor. One of the things that gets in the way of some components of the root cause protocol are histamines. And the nutrient-dense food like beef liver or retinol, cod liver oil, things of that nature, will trigger a histamine response. What's important to know is that in 1948, when Holmberg and Lahl unveiled their discovery about this blue protein, they said that there's a 400% increase in histaminase activity in the presence of histamines. So histaminase is an enzyme that we now call DAO. And we think it stands for diamine oxidase. It doesn't. It was dextramine oxidase. Turns out that proteins unfold to the left. They're levo. Proteins are supposed to be levo, and when they're dexter, the body doesn't recognize them and triggers a histamine response. So what causes dextramines in today's food? They're called microwaves. So microwaves are the biggest producer of dextramines, and the problem we've got is people don't have the histaminase enzyme function because people don't have enough ceruloplasmin that has enough copper. And the issue with retinol partially is this histamine issue. I think the bigger issue is people just don't have it in their diet. We live in a low-fat society. There's no heavy cream. There's no butter. There's no cod liver oil. There's no organ meats in the typical diet. And so the sources of retinol are MIA, and then you put on top of that the obsession with vitamin D. Well, how in the world does vitamin A ever get its due if it's being drowned out by vitamin D? Because the uptake mechanism in the gut is it's binary. I can take one or the other, but I can't take both. And if you're constantly being exposed to D, I just heard about a client from one of my students in Poland. This patient was told by her doctor during COVID to take 20,000 units of vitamin D every day for 3 years. Guess what she has now? Lou Gehrig's disease. She can't even talk now. And the doctor wants to blame COVID. And that's bullshit.
Well, I think with one of your other favorite minerals, magnesium, having it, if someone's extremely magnesium deficient, vitamin D will be quite toxic to them, as they won't be able to do that 24 to 25 hydroxy conversion. And
that's exactly right. Yes, absolutely. The other side that you mentioned, oh, if you don't have retinol, we'll just go through beta carotene. No. There's something called retinol equivalency units, which you read about in the book. And it takes 12 beta carotenes to equal 1 retinol. And the world is being deluded into thinking that, oh, if I get 1,000 units of beta carotene, I've got my bases covered. Well, divide that 1,000 by 12. And it's just, people don't realize the sleight of hand that's used in nutrition all day long. And so I think retinol becomes this sleeper issue that people don't know about because they've not had it in their diet for a long time. And when they do introduce it, I don't know what the percentage of people is that respond or react to it, but there is some percentage who are overwhelmed by it. So you just have to dial back and ease your way into supplementing and bringing it into your diet. You may need to use a practitioner from NAET to correct the error message that keeps triggering the histamine reaction. But I think that people are weathering that storm and are finding tremendous results from it.
Okay. You mentioned dexteramines. You mentioned something about microwaves, potential misfolding of proteins, or the protein is folded the wrong way.
It's unfolding. And
okay.
So I learned that years ago reading some article by Joe Mercola talking about the invention of the microwave is Russian. It was for it was German. It was the Germans who invented it for their troops in Russia. And the troops in Russia were old men and little boys, and they didn't care.
Okay.
And then the Russians got access to the technology, and they've studied it, as have the Scandinavians. And you don't find microwaves in Scandinavia and Russia the way you do in the Western world. So they see it differently than we do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I'm going to propose a little bit of a counter argument here, and I think it'll shake things up a bit. So we've been chatting with a lot of communities online talking about acetaldehyde. It's a byproduct of a lot of pathogenic infections in the body, like Candida albicans and Aspergillus, Klebsiella, E. coli, SIBO, SIFO, this kind of stuff. Like, you have intestinal overgrowth. And so one of the interactions they found that even if the intake of retinol is adequate in the diet, if there was a presence of acetaldehyde producing bacteria or fungal infections in the small colon or the large colon, that the retinol would be corrupted into anhydroretinol. So it's like a kind of like a modification of the hydroxyl group, but that they found that after retinol was corrupted into this other form, anhydroretinol, and this is the work of I've seen Meredith Arthur and Jenny Jones, and they've been talking a lot about just how many different pathologies this is connected to and how many it can cause. And so the primary pathogenic factor was the inhibition of pyruvate dehydrogenase complex, and just like damaging the electron transport chain in the mitochondria and such. And so once this happened, you essentially don't have copper metabolism anymore or good mineral metabolism anymore, because it's just this vortex of dysfunction. And so my question for you would be how much have you or your team explored this idea, And what kind of connections do you see here to improving retinol metabolism and improving copper metabolism, so that someone can reintroduce these things into their diet again?
I'm not familiar with this research, which doesn't mean anything. It's just only so many hours in the day. The research I am familiar with, and I'm blanking on the author's name, I think it's 2017, and I think it's higher, but I'll get you the exact reference. But it talks about how the presence of retinol in the gut changes the microbiome. Well, I don't know what the conditions are that these scientists are using to study this acetaldehyde, or what the metabolite that you mentioned. But all those pathogens that you mentioned are living on iron. And what is retinol's primary job on the planet? Is to ensure iron recycling. And so we're putting a spotlight on the negative metabolite, and we're acknowledging that the pathogens are there, but we're not talking about the iron that's there, that's feeding all of the pathogens that you're referring to. And the reason why we're on the planet, the reason why you and I are having this very switched on conversation with very switched on technology, is that higher order of thinking requires more energy. Copper made that possible. Oxidizing the fats and the sugars made that higher order thinking possible. And nothing's more important to that than that metabolism, especially the metabolism of retinol. So I appreciate that there may be some conditions under which this mechanism might get tweaked, but I think we have to pick apart all the variables so we really understand how is the iron being accounted for, how's the bioavailable copper being accounted for in the gut. There are 1,000 different multi-copper oxidases in the gut. Have they accounted for all 1,000 of them in their studies? I doubt it. So again, we have this tension in contemporary science to demonize retinol, one of the most important metabolites on planet Earth. And according to the actual biologists, they'll tell us that retinol was here millions of years before vitamin D. A long time. How do they know that? I have no idea. I've never had a conversation with an astrobiologist. It would be fascinating. But they know stuff that we need to know and understand. And vitamin A is a light sensor. We've got photons. Let's work with them. Vitamin D is a light filter. Let's block the light. And that's exactly what vitamin D does. No one likes to hear that. They love to think that vitamin D walks on water, it's going to take care of me. It does not do that. It's very disruptive, which is what the D stands for. And maybe I put too much stock in retinol, but if you've got these studies, you are at liberty to send them my way. I'd love to read them and see what we can do to really delve into this in a more substantive way. And I will make sure that you have the article that I'm referring to, so you can see the life-changing impact, the pathogen-changing impact of retinol in the gut compared to retinol palmitate, compared to retinoic acid. It's retinol, the frequency and energy behind retinol it absolutely changes the microbiome. So we can continue the dueling banjos, but let's have some other studies to back it up.
Yeah, no, that's great. I definitely would like to talk about vitamin D a little bit more, but what you're saying is really interesting about how retinol modifies the microbiome, and this would certainly be beneficial for the immune system.
Absolutely beneficial.
So we're talking about...
We have to wonder, why did they take vitamin A out of our diet? Talk to your colleagues, your friends, your neighbors, your family. Ask them what's the source of retinol in your diet? First, you have to explain to them what retinol is. Then you have to explain what vitamin A is. Then you have to explain where you find it in the diet. It's not in the modern contemporary diet.
Mm-hmm.
And 200 years ago, there's a famous cookbook written, Betty Farmer's Cookbook, in Boston. Would encourage you to track it down. It'll blow your mind, because everything in that cookbook is using retinol. Heavy cream, butter, organ meats, and people don't know this.
Mm-hmm. It seems like all the natural foods were demonized, the ones that contained retinol, and then all the processed foods, like you're saying, you had mentioned retinol palmitate, and all of these synthetic additives and versions of vitamin A that really the body doesn't metabolize in quite the same way. And so, really the power in animal foods is that you had retinol that your body didn't need to convert or change into anything. It's not the precursor form, it's ready to go and to be used in your cells. As we talk about, we talked about histamines, we talked about acetaldehyde, and we talked about retinol. And, we've seen how these all compete for the same pathway, which is aldehyde dehydrogenase, which it uses a lot of energy to then, transform that into, the next byproduct that our body can then just take care of. I think one of the, as again you went over, is we've replaced sources of retinol with fortification and cheap junk and bad versions of retinol. But it does seem that we can get enough from beta carotene, if we're certainly like eating the rainbow. But it's not the same. It'll be a little bit more taxing for the body to have to do the conversion, and then it seems like also we have the interaction of all of these heavy metals, which are causing the accumulation of iron, and like competitive inhibition of its metabolism. So like the mercury and the lead and the cadmium, aluminum, and these kinds of things. How do you see copper and retinol aiding in the detoxification of some of these in some of these heavy metals, and if you have any points of discussion on that aldehyde dehydrogenase pathway, I would love to hear your thoughts on that as well.
So I spoke recently at the biological dentist meeting in Salt Lake, the IAONT, and I had the opportunity to be the cleanup guy. I was the last speaker, and if you remember, I don't know whether you've ever seen the cartoon Rocky and Bullwinkle, but there's a very notable ending to that cartoon with this guy cleaning up the street from all the poop that's been laid down by the parade. And so that's what I was kind of invited to do. But I've been listening to the speakers very carefully, and they were talking about the heavy metals, the lead, the mercury, and they weren't talking about cadmium, but they were talking about, not that it's a heavy metal, but they were talking about fluoride. And this group of dentists are very forward-thinking, very progressive. They were opposed to fluoride and mercury 30 years ago. So they are the ones who you want to go to if you have a question about the heavy metals in your mouth. They're the ones you want to make sure you are spending time with. But a little voice said, what do these three poisons have in common? And I thought to myself, I don't know. So I started to research. It turns out that lead, mercury, and fluoride all attack the same complex in the mitochondria. It's complex 4.
Cytochrome C oxidase.
Cytochrome C oxidase. And what do they all do? Oh yeah, they chelate copper. Ding, ding, ding. And so there's two ways to help people. You can strengthen the host, which is what we're doing in the root cause protocol, or you can attack the guest, which is what the rest of healing does. They love to talk about the toxins and the heavy metals and the diseases and the pathogens, but they completely bypass the natural ability of the body to heal itself. And so when I'm aware of the fact that the mitochondria have 50,000 atoms of copper in their matrix, that's the little swimming pool inside each mitochondria. That research is courtesy of Paul Kobine at Auburn University, 2004, 2006. 2005, Dr. Puchkova in Russia points out that, the ligand that the copper is attached to is called ceruloplasmin, ding, ding, ding. Nobody talks about that. And we're just supposed to believe that copper is swimming by itself, which is insane. And I've got a list of 22 components of the mitochondria that are copper dependent. But when you read articles about the mitochondria, they'll just tell you that complex 4 is copper dependent. They don't tell you that 1, 3, 4, 5, that the adenine nucleotide translocase and dozens of other components are copper dependent. Why? Because they don't want people realizing how simple the solution is. So I'm not a Luddite. I know that heavy metals are a serious problem, but I think our innate ability to heal is very, very high, very strong. And we have been trained, like circus bears, to believe that our body is stupid, that it's incapable of recovery, and it has no resilience. What is missing entirely is something called copper. It's not in the diet. We'd like to think it is, but we live in a world of glyphosate, high fructose corn syrup, and third and fourth generation antibiotics like Cipro. And they all chelate copper at a prodigious rate. And so what we're missing is an understanding of what's the intelligence and function of copper enzymes in the human body. Let me give you an example. In 1971, the dean of metal biology, Earl Frieden, who was at Florida State University for 45 years, wrote an article, again, 1971, about ceruloplasmin being the link between copper and iron metabolism. It's a very central tenet of sanity. It is not taught in any healing school. Although I did and emailed you an article that I think you would really enjoy from 2022, written by professors of acupuncture at Shanghai University School of Traditional Chinese Medicine. And I assure you, they know 10 times more about ceruloplasmin than all the doctors you know from Western medicine. And that should make everyone a little nervous that the Chinese acupuncturists know about ceruloplasmin and how important it is. So I've changed the spelling of acupuncture. AC.CU.puncture. Apparently acupuncture stimulates the production of ceruloplasmin. I didn't know that. That's very intriguing. But the point is, because people don't know about ceruloplasmin, they're completely in the dark. And what Dr. Frieden talks about in his 1971 article is that even if there is a 10% function of ceruloplasmin, not level, function, you will not have anemia. When you get down to 1% function, you're going to have disruption of iron recycling. But it will still recycle, but not as well. And what he goes on to say is that when you have 7 days of zero ferroxidase enzyme activity, that is when the animals become anemic. 7 days of zero peroxidase function. Do you know how many people on the planet think they're anemic? And what that's really telling us is that they have zero ferroxidase function, which I say is a crime against humanity, because we're not allowed to measure that ferroxidase function, and we're not allowed to make that ceruloplasmin protein. And so we entertain ourselves with lofty conversations about, different metabolites breaking down in the body, when in fact the body knows how to heal itself if it had access to the real deal.
Okay.
And so that's the challenge we face.
Yeah. So what do you think are some of the motivating factors behind, people using things like methylene blue and colloidal silver, all of these things that are not essential nutrients for the human body, rather than starting with the essential nutrients first, like copper and retinol and magnesium and molybdenum and all of these essential minerals and such, that most people don't even use a chronometer to assay whether they've meeten minimum criteria for all of these nutrients, but yet jump into these experimental things like methylene blue that stimulate the electron transport chain, and colloidal silver that essentially is just a tool that people use, but is not the precise tool to get the job done. But what do you think is the primary motivating factors behind essentials getting pushed aside, and all of these interesting molecules being thrown in the mix?
I met a number of years ago, I met a very high-profile consultant to the natural food industry. And he said, Morley, everybody wants to know what's new. They're always asking, Michael, what's new? What's new? And that's what dominates our consciousness. What's new? He said, my sincere advice to you is to focus on what's enduring. And that exchange got me to study and to learn about the great oxygen event billions of years ago that I didn't know anything about. If you don't know about the GOE, you don't understand copper and iron metabolism and what its origin is. And we live in a culture that has been conditioned by the system to focus on what's new and keep us relentlessly questioning what's new, and teach us that anything that's more than a week old is old news. Most of the truths that I've been able to assemble is from articles from the 1900s, 1910s, 1920s, 1930s, because that's really, those findings were of enduring value. And it doesn't mean there's just nothing in the contemporary world that's not important. This article from 2022 from Liu and Ji, it'll blow your mind when you take the time to read what they know about ceruloplasmin. But the point is, people get very easily distracted with shiny objects, of which I think methylene blue is a classic example of, and many others like it. Let's add some oxygen to the water. Let's add some hydrogen to the water. Let's do this, let's do that. And the people who are throwing out all these ideas have this much understanding of copper metabolism. And that's the problem. Copper has been relegated to the backwater of science. The copper studies that I've found, most of them are stored with the Ark of the Covenant in the Indiana Jones warehouse, and people don't take the time to unearth the truth that's out there. To me, one of the most important studies of all time, actually two studies, both occurred in 1928, March at the University of Wisconsin, May at the University of Kentucky. They withheld copper from the animal's diet. And what happened? Oh, the liver filled up with iron. Well, that's a good thing to know. And so what's one of the fastest growing diseases on planet Earth? It's called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. It's not complicated. There are only three variables: lack of vitamin A, lack of copper, and excess of iron. It's not rocket science, but people keep looking for something new to solve old problems. And we've known for a century that taking copper out of the diet causes massive iron accumulation in the liver, and then eventually it's going to fill up other organs as well. But that's old. What did Dr. Hart know it UW-Madison? What did Dr. McHard know at University of Kentucky? They knew a heck of a lot. And what Dr. McHard did in 1925 was publish all of the retinol-rich foods that you can get on the farm have copper in them. How about that? And there we see the linking of copper and retinol being identified as early as 1925. And so it's just all of that wisdom is lost to what's new. And it's an exhausting din of society that is a complete distraction and waste of time.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, well said. One of the things I'm kind of trying to do is connect two communities together in a way. These researchers, Meredith Arthur, Jenny Jones, there's another one who did some research on sulfites, Andrew Baird. He loves phosphatidylcholine, and sorry, yeah, and you can't produce it from choline to phosphatidylcholine without copper, which is interesting because when retinol metabolism shuts down, then copper metabolism shuts down, and then you can no longer produce phosphatidylcholine. And so, but the thing I'm trying to do is like these researchers are actually trying to increase the amount of retinol they're taking in their diet. They run large forums, and they're all trying to figure out ways to stop it from being corrupted and consume more of it. And so it looks like you had something you want to say more about phosphatidylcholine, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well. But also, what do you think might be some essential nutrient cofactors that are really important to keep in mind alongside vitamin A that will help us metabolize it and increase our dose of retinol?
Well, I think, again, we're back to the root cause protocol, and there's stops and starts. And it isn't so much, it's not really pride of authorship. All I did was ask simple questions. What is Mother Nature seeking to do with an ancestral diet? And if anything, I picked up where Weston A. Price left off. His genius, of course, was recognizing the importance of retinol. He knew how important it was. He never got to the minerals. And I think if he'd lived longer, he probably would have. And I wish he had lived longer. In March of 2024, I had a wonderful conversation with Sally Fallon, she has as much command of retinol as Dr. Price had. I said, Sally, where does copper fit into your world? And she said, well, I just know that. So what she knew was the retinol side. She didn't know that there's a copper retinol axis in the same way that there's an iron sugar axis. People don't know that the body runs on these two axes. And I think we were really designed as a species to run on copper and fat. And what have they been doing? They've been pouring sugar in our tank since 1900. And what kind of car do you drive?
A 2008 Toyota Yaris.
Would you ever put sugar in the tank? The gas tank?
Nope.
Why not?
Because it takes gasoline.
Well, it takes gasoline, and the sugar would kill the function of the engine. And that's exactly what I think sugar does in our mitochondria. And this idea that, we run on glucose? Really? Do we? I've read...
I mean, you're not exactly eating a ketogenic diet, though, are you?
No, I'm not. No, that's a fair comeback. But the point is, I don't think we were designed to have the level of sugar that the average person has in their diet. We certainly were not designed to have high fructose corn syrup. Oh my God! But you might as well just suck the copper out of the animal and the individual. And so we've lost sight of the macronutrients. What are the right minerals, the right macronutrients, the vitamins and the other nutrients and cofactors, and the components that we talk about in the stops and the starts are really meant to invigorate the production of ceruloplasmin. Is it perfect? Of course it's not. Have we studied it scientifically? No, we haven't. We are just, the tragedy, Nathaniel, is that there's no textbook, there's no guide, handbook, or anything. It's about how to de-iron the human being, and there's no handbook on how to recopper the human being. But that's basically what we're trying to do, and then letting the innate wisdom of the body take over. And that's the whole basis of the RCP. And so, could we have 75 components? Of course we could, but then no one would do it. So we tried to restrict it to a dozen stops and a dozen starts. That's still a lot for people to do. And does everyone have phenomenal results? Of course they don't. But those who really are committed to it, who are able to discipline themselves, seem to have some really amazing breakthrough recovery. And again, I think it's just waking up the natural mechanisms of homeostasis that we were designed with, but have been distorted by a modern food system.
It really seems like the demonizing of macronutrients. We went through several phases. There's a lot of demonizing of sugar, demonizing of fats, and then the demonizing of certain protein sources like, red meat and such, which, they were more so focused on the saturated fat in the meat being bad. And actually, if they would have helped people understand that the iron in the red meat is actually the thing that becomes problematic, maybe we actually would have gotten somewhere. But, it's all this big focus on the macronutrients, and again, like you're kind of referring to, no focus on the micronutrients to keep metabolism operating safely, because when the mitochondria are missing something in certain electron stages of the transport chain, then the mitochondria start to produce a lot of reactive oxygen species, and then kind of like you're saying, it's like running a car on sugar. You're creating a lot of bad stuff without having any balance in the system. And I've heard you talk about some of the whole grains and whole food sources of glucose, which would be far more superior for our body, and whole food sources of copper, whole food sources of retinol, as much as you can, trying to get your nutrients. But I mean, you are someone who recognizes that our soils are mineral depleted, and so supplementation has kind of become a must in our age. Often, even if you're eating organic foods, the difficult thing is it's always going to be a struggle to get enough copper, and to get enough of those essential minerals like molybdenum, which is also very important for our iron metabolism, at the first step for sulfur metabolism, right, for the iron sulfur clusters, which copper again is also going to be involved in that, but at some point you're gonna, go ahead.
Let's be real careful about iron sulfur clusters. Again, and maybe I'm goofy this way, but I'm very protective of copper and ceruloplasmin. You want to kill copper in the body? Focus on molybdenum. And again, I know what you're talking about with the iron sulfur clusters, but you really want to get into the weeds of it. Look up ABCB8 and the role that it plays in the mitochondria to jettison iron out of the mitochondria to enable iron sulfur cluster formation. And if ABCB8 doesn't work right, you're going to kill the energy production in the mitochondria. So I think it's taken me 15 years to finally realize everyone likes to talk about the energy furnaces called the mitochondria. They're not furnaces. They're not power plants like we're told they are. They're smithies. They're recycling iron all day long in the same way that GM factories make cars all day long. And what do they have? Oh, yeah, they have a power plant that makes it happen. They rely on energy. And so the mitochondria are the terminal destination for iron and oxygen. What's the only element on planet Earth that can neutralize iron and oxygen? Oh yeah, it's copper. And so the copper is swimming in the matrix. The copper is in all these different subunits, all these different chaperones, all these different transporters. Nobody talks about that. And the need to recycle iron at a mitochondrial level, at a cellular level, and a systemic level is copper dependent, and nobody talks about that. And it's like, we're supposed to, oh yeah, you got to have molybdenum for that one enzyme. It's like, no, if you really dig into it, you're going to find that copper is involved in that mechanism as well. But they don't like you to know that.
But what would be the correct ratio? I mean, it would probably vary from person to person. But, say you supplement 4 milligrams of copper, what would be a correct ratio, total dietary intake, including supplements of molybdenum, in reference to copper?
I don't even know. I've never focused on molybdenum, only because I know what it does to copper. Again, and maybe I'm the Luddite here, and I apologize for my ignorance. But the thing is, the whole basis of the root cause protocol is to focus on the fundamentals and let nature take its course. Worry about copper and iron and magnesium and stop micromanaging everything else. Because I just don't think we were not meant to microanalyze our diet. Now, granted, we live in a very toxic world that has very toxic food. I'm very sensitive to that. The fact that in 2022, they did a study of French citizens and 99% are peeing glyphosate in their urine, that's unsettling to find out about, which means we're all peeing glyphosate in our urine. So we are at a critical edge of society. And we need to be thoughtful, but I don't think we need to hyper manage every nuance of our diet. I think that's disordered thinking from on high, from the people who love to manipulate our world. And so I think we've got to simplify our path and give people the grace to know that they can do this, and that they don't have to have a micrometer for every component of their diet. I don't think it's that necessary. But that's just me. I'm an older guy. I've had a good life. I'm trying to do good, but I appreciate all the research that's going on around the world. But what I'm really unsettled by are these professors of acupuncture knowing more about ceruloplasmin than I did. And I'm very grateful for what I learned. But it's like, why did I have to go to China to learn that? And it's just, to me, that's the answer, is there is this protein that when it was discovered, it had 8 coppers in it. And now we're supposed to accept the fact that it has 6. I've seen references to the fact, well, actually it's only 5. What are they doing? They're methodically changing the structure of ceruloplasmin, now through our diet and through other campaigns. And so I don't think that's a good direction to be taking. And so we just have to be vigilant about what are we doing to preserve the food and our sanity in a very unfettered world of insanity right now. That's the challenge.
Yeah, in your book you go over a lot of methods to preserve ceruloplasmin and its function. So for example, you mentioned that a certain amount of ascorbic acid can bleach ceruloplasmin and hinder its function. Do you have any more recent research or any developments on things that hinder ceruloplasmin and damage its function, and things that improve ceruloplasmin's function?
Great question. The study that has unnerved me beyond the Shanghai University is a study from March 6th of this year. And it's about CTR1. It's also known as SLC31A1. It's the front door for copper to come into the cell. It's the copper transporter 1, CTR1. what I learned is that if that transporter is not stimulated by copper in the diet, it sets in play a series of mechanisms that then create copper depletion in the cell. Let that sink in. Copper deficiency causes copper depletion. And what's the meme that runs medicine? You're anemic and you're copper toxic. So everybody wants to withhold copper from their diet, right? Wink, wink. And that's the world we find ourselves in, is that the master antioxidant metal, copper, is supposed to be inside the master antioxidant protein, ceruloplasmin, is now threatened by blocking its entry into the cell by virtue of it's not in the soil, it's not in the food, it's being blocked by high fructose corn syrup and other chemical agents that we're all being exposed to. I'm a simple guy. I know how important copper is. Why is it being blocked methodically across the board? And I've got a lot of research to back up why copper is important. And we live in a world of inversion where people don't realize that the truth is inside out now. And this study from just a week, almost a month ago now, has really rattled my cage. That is so, I don't have the mechanisms memorized, but it's a very straight path from copper's not getting in the door, then we're going to make sure we get rid of copper in the cell. And it's like, it's breathtaking in its importance. And no one talks about it. Because it's brand new. Hey, what's new? It is new. It's new research. I don't hear anybody talking about it. I've already talked twice about it. But again, the social media being what it is, it's like trying to get attention in the world today is next to impossible. Because there's just this constant blather of chatter, and everyone's talking about what's new, but not what's important. Let's talk about what's important, and let's talk about what's enduring. And unfortunately, I'm going to turn into a pumpkin very soon because I've got a class that starts in about 8 minutes. But I would love to continue the dialogue because I know you have other questions, and I would welcome the chance to bridge these communities just to find out where is our common ground, because I'm sure we agree on a lot. We might have sparks over some things, but let's find out where those sparks are, why those sparks are, and see if we can bridge that.
No, that's awesome. It was a pleasure speaking with you today, Morley. And I look forward to chatting with you again sometime. And we can continue and perhaps we can bridge some thoughts. I know it was...
that you've referred to. I've sent you an article. You send me one or two that you've got, and I will be happy to study it and see what I learn from it and how I can help respond to your questions in a more complete way.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay. You
have a great day. Have a good class.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.